engage with the upcoming events. And as you can see, now I'm blocked out by that little screen that says in progress. The great backyard bird count is coming up, and we have the next meeting will be understanding spring migration. So hopefully everyone will be on board in March, and well, I guess we need to mute some.
Can I press tap to speak?
We need to mute some people.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So I will move to page 2 here, I think. There we go. We do have our first formal bird and nature walk. I hope you've been going out without us, but don't wait for us. Just get out there. Will be March 31st at the state park, and Don Wilson, who will be able to register you, and you'll be able to go on our website and find the registration and link in. We have other bird walks planned. We will put them up later as we get closer to those dates, or maybe not too far away in a newsletter. We will be, Shara's been working on that to get that all intact. And so there's a number in different locations and different sites for different bird habitats. Coming soon, we hope. We just had this, some of you might have been on the piping plover Great Lakes presentation. It was in the middle of the day, and actually it was National that was putting that on, and it was very informative, very, very informative. And I think that's been taped, so you might be able to find that presentation. It's very good, and we're hoping to have our monitors and our people in that will do public help out there on the beach if the plovers start coming back. I've got a meeting tomorrow where we're going to talk about more signage with Waukegan to try to stem having dogs running around on the beach, especially during the breeding season.
Great.
So today I delivered the perfect signs for Bird City, and I think they're being presented right now again in the back of the meeting, Waukegan's board meeting that's on Zoom right now. But the signs were redone because they had some pixelation, and they look great. So we know that some people might be on here. They've been working on some other bird cities. For instance, Grays Lake is working on Bird City, and so is Libertyville. If your community would so like to work on it, you certainly can contact us, and we will send you information and get you started.
55, okay.
So with that, we are going to move to tonight's presentation, so they have plenty of time. And we appreciate you being able to be with us tonight, and our audience also too. And hopefully you will get the incentive to maybe become a bird monitor. And remember, you can start out really slow by just doing the backyard bird count. That'll get you started to get some knowledge, and you sit there with your books open if you're a very beginner. So I will somehow stop my sharing up here if I can find my cursor, and we will start. Thank you again. Let's see. Here we go.
You gotta share. Oh,
Okay. Are we doing both?
yeah.
Oh, okay.
Is Beau speaking?
Oh, you want me to speak? Oh, okay.
Yep. Yep.
Right. Hi, everybody. I'm Beau Schaefer. I've been doing the breeding bird surveys at Rollins Savannah for, I think, about 6 years now. I really like doing the breeding bird surveys, mostly because it forces me to slow down a little bit. I'm more of a spastic birder. I go way too fast most of the time. But when you're doing breeding bird surveys, you have to sit there and try and see if birds are breeding, try to find confirmation of breeding success, things like bringing food back to the young and so on, which requires you to spend a lot more time watching them, which is something I really need to spend more time doing than I actually do most of the time. So that's why I like doing the surveys. Plus, you get out there and find stuff always that, just like any other time birding really, but you find new things that you don't expect. Rollins is a great place for numerous reasons, but in the summer, we have breeding waterfowl, which you really don't, in Lake County, it's really difficult to find breeding waterfowl in a lot of places except for wood ducks. I had 7 species breeding waterfowl this year on my first survey, I think. So blue-winged teal and hooded merganser, I think this is the first year that I've ever had confirmation of breeding of hooded merganser at Rock. I think they probably bred there in the past, but I've never been able to confirm that they were there. So that was a really good one. And then we have gadwall and trumpeter swan and mallard, a few other ones, wood duck. So it's a great spot for finding summer waterfowl. You can go to the next slide, Doug. This year was especially great because this is the first year I've ever had dick sissels on my breeding bird survey. They usually pass through late in May, but I don't ever get, and I had probably 7 or 8 breeding males on territory, which was really cool because I've never had them out there before. So that was fun to look at. So I had those on the first survey. So the first survey is the first week in June. So you get out there and you can still have migrants out there that are late, and so some of the birds aren't going to be breeding, but there's a lot of cool stuff to look at still on the first survey. Okay, Doug, go ahead. Next one.
Okay.
And then second survey at the end of the month. I think I actually did my last one first couple of days of July. So you don't have as many migrants, although you might have some migrant shorebirds if you have some shorebird habitat, but the numbers of birds is generally not as many in the second survey as in the first, mostly because the migrants are not as prevalent. But I found a northern bobwhite this year, which was a county lifer for me, which was amazing. I mean, that bird, we don't really know where it came from, but hey, I'm counting it as a wild bird as far as I know. So, but it was very cool to see a bobwhite out there. And that was, that's the thing about doing the breeding bird surveys is you can find all kinds of cool stuff, and you work really hard at trying to find out if they're breeding or not, or if they're just passing through, and it forces you to watch the birds longer and learn more things about them, which is always good. And so, yeah, that's pretty much it. Unless there's anything else you want me to, any questions you want me to answer, Charlotte?
I think we'll have questions at the end, but
Okay.
while you're here, I do want to mention that Beau is going to be leading a walk at Rollins. This is a great opportunity. Beau is, lives right there, and he knows more about Rollins than anybody in the county. And Sunday, April 10th. So mark it on a calendar. That's a great upcoming bird walk as well.
Yeah, hopefully we'll see lots of good stuff out there.
Great.
So Beau's been an experienced bird monitor, and we now are going to have Kerry Swift here in just a second. We're switching screens. Kerry was a monitor for the first time this past year. So giving you some variety of experience between.
Go to the top.
Okay.
All right. Kerry?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, I am the official newbie representative here. It was an introduction into a lot of different things for me. I would say pleasant introduction. So let me show you what I saw. It was Raven Glen Forest Preserve, which I think is sort of new in the forest preserves, but it has several different areas there. You can see there's A, B, C, D, and E, and F, I guess. I'm just going to refer to them as the Eastern and Middle and Western. You can see the blue spots. Those are the monitoring spots. They do give you GPS coordinates, and the app actually helps you find them. If you turn your app on with, GPS enabled, you can actually see where you are relative to the spot. So that did help me. But anyway, because I have 2 spots in the eastern section, and then one in the middle, and then one in the western section by the lake there, Rav F, Ravinia, or sorry, Raven Glen. Okay, so those are my spots. And then the next slide will show how I set about to go. I went to the 2 eastern spots as my first stab at this, and to try to get my sea legs here a little bit. It is an early program. They like you to get out really near dawn if possible, because the birds are more active then. I had done a little homework and looked at the satellite images of, like on Google Maps, I saw that there was a row of trees that was near the one monitoring spot. So that sort of helped me find it even without my GPS. And then immediately when I stepped out there, I saw a nice bird that I actually didn't expect. It was a brown thrasher, because I hadn't seen that many here in Lake County. I'm more familiar with them in the south. But he was not singing, but I counted him anyway. And that was my first bird and already set the pace for my enthusiasm. Then I saw a lot of other species, but most of the ones that I was familiar with. And got a nice list going in the app. They let you, you choose the species. You can do it after the fact, or you can even do it live if you want to. But you basically go by hearing or sight and count for 10 minutes and enter everything that you hear or see within, the radius that you have. Then I went down to that second spot, which in that eastern section, which was also pretty easy to find. And there I was enthusiastic to hear only, though, hearing only, dickcissel and eastern meadowlark. But those are easy ones to get if you've had any familiarity with those birds. So anyway, that was a good first day for me. And then I'll tell you about my other adventures for the next days. Okay, so the second day I decided to do in other words, I went out on a different day, also early, and went to the middle section. It's all prairie. And first thing I heard was a bunch of cheap notes that I really didn't recognize, but I finally got good views of the bird because they were very close to me, and they were field sparrows. So that was fun. I already learned something about a bird species, which is what Beau was saying. You sometimes learn a lot of details that you miss if you are just sailing along, like adding to your list or something, by planting yourself, which is what they require you to do on the spot. You get a few details somehow. And then the other thing that happened was I heard this insect-like buzzing sparrow song. And that was very exciting because I knew it was probably a good bird. And the only bird I could remember that had that kind of insect-type song I thought was a grasshopper sparrow. So I decided to just enter that as the best I could. But later I found out other things, but I'll tell you about that on another slide. So the main thing is, though, you can't always get your binoculars on a bird that you think you hear, because you're supposed to stay and do it for 10 minutes straight. Okay, the next slide is my biggest, adventure. Continuing that day, I went to the western section by the lake. There's a road there too, and a lake and a very large cattail marsh. But the spot that they have on the map is sort of in the middle of the cattail marsh. Perhaps it's in an island. But I said, okay, well, I've been finding these other spots, so I'll give it a try. I'll go out there. So I waited out, and about 50 yards in, my boot went all the way down about 2 feet. And honestly, that was an interesting feeling. I'm from Colorado, and we don't have quicksand back in Colorado that I know of. Anyway, so I wondered if whether my skeleton would eventually be found there. So, but I calmed down. I removed my foot from the boot and then pulled out the boot and was able to go back. So I wrote Gary, one of the people in charge of the program, and he said I could monitor at the roadside instead. So that's what I did later. And then my next slide will tell you the improved protocol by the roadside. I heard a lot of blackbirds and yellowthroats and I think a marsh wren, but I got a nice visual on a black tern, which I again didn't expect. It's a nice bird species to see, and apparently there's good habitat there, and Raven Glen Forest Preserve, high quality, because black terns are not that easy to find. And then I kept seeing this large raptor flying over the lake, and finally it came my way, and it got a pretty good view of it. It was an osprey, and then I went up to the cell phone tower, which is one of their common places to nest, or at least perch. So that was my exciting third day without going into the deep mud. So later, the addendum here is that I read Al Stokey's daily reports, and a week or two later, weirdly enough, I noticed that he had gone to the middle parcel of Raven Glen. I thought, well, what is he doing there? That's not one of his normal hangouts. Well, he was there for a clay-colored sparrow. Somehow his intelligence network had clued him in that there might be one there. Maybe it was somebody like Beau Schaefer that told him that it was a clay-colored sparrow there. But anyway, I think that's probably what I heard instead of what I thought was a grasshopper sparrow. So for the finale, let's, Doug, if you could play the songs.
Yep. Grasshopper sparrow.
Yes. Okay, that's a buzzing sort of sound.
Yep. Yep. Okay, and in the clay color.
Yes. Well, the recording makes it sound really different. They do have a kind of a buzz, insect-like sound to them. So my apologies to the program for misidentifying that bird. I'm pretty sure it was a clay-colored sparrow because Al himself was there for that very bird. There are not that many of them around. So I was right that it was a cool bird to find. So I have my conclusion slide next. I had a good time, learned a lot, like Beau said, it's a different way of looking at it all, and you really can enjoy it and appreciate the fine details maybe. I hope the data will help towards conservation. That's the point of it. And if you can spare the time and get up early, I do recommend the program. That is all.
All right.
And is Bob Fisher? Where's Bob? Next is going to be Bob Fisher. Check that he's here.
Oh yeah, he's there. Yep. And I think he was going to share himself. Bob, do you want to share your screen and start your? Yep.
Everybody see that?
Yep.
All right, let me get to slideshow. My apologies, but it's not doing what I want it to do here. I'm going to stop sharing and go to slideshow and then share again. if I
Okay.
can.
I forgot to say thank you, Doug or Charlotte, or both of you for helping me present my PowerPoint there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, crap. Hang on just a second. Let's see if we can get this done. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Well, I think I'm just going to go through it this way. So we have
Yeah, hit that.
that better?
It hasn't changed. You're showing,
Okay,
but
It's not slideshow.
it's not a slideshow, but
But it is slide 2, Doug.
you should see it.
right, slide 2.
Creators of the trends analyses.
You're on slide 2.
Yeah, it's the creators of the analysis.
That's 3, slide 3. But you're showing slide 2.
And it's called the creators of the trends analysis.
That's slide 3, but what you're showing is slide 2, the one before.
Weird. So
If you
you
want, I
think-
can try sharing if you would.
Yeah, maybe that's going to work better. Just because.
Yeah, maybe that'll work better. So why don't you stop sharing and I'll.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll just tell you in advance when I've.
What is this one?
Sorry about that, everybody.
Yeah. Okay,
And yeah, you got to go to the start.
there we go.
All right, thank
Good.
you. So for those of you who don't know, the Bird Conservation Network is a coalition of about 20 different groups through the Chicago area. And certainly your group is a member of the Bird Conservation Network Coalition. And back a bit more than 20 years ago, we started up a breeding bird monitoring program, and to cover what is generically called the I guess I'll say the Chicago area, but it was basically the Chicago Wilderness Coalition. And the data is based from 1999 through 1920. And we completed an analysis of that 21 years worth of data. Next slide. These are the people who I wanted to acknowledge them. The lady that did the statistical analysis, we actually hired from outside. She's an ornithologist, biologist who's experienced with statistics. Next slide, please. So what is the Chicago Wilderness Region, the CW region? It's a network of natural areas, which totals a bit more than 500,000 acres, about 850 square miles, and it's embedded in, let's say, the metro counties around Chicago. It's obviously one of the largest metro centers in North America. And that's a pretty impressive number, that 500,000+ acres of natural lands. So obviously there are a lot of breeding birds who use those lands. Next, please. The trends that we've done, this update based on the history, is based on 4 habitat types, and I'll talk a little bit about each one. Grasslands, shrublands, woodlands, and wetlands. And the focus is on those 4. We had a category called urban or whatever, but we never really pursued that very strongly. So it's basically these 4 types of habitat. The next slide. So within the habitats and within the species of birds that nest here in the Chicago wilderness or Chicago region, the Fish and Wildlife Service, they have classifications of birds of concern, which are below. They're not, at this moment, they don't qualify for protection as threatened with extinction, but they do have concern long range. And the 3 classifications are, as you can see here, level 1 is high, and they need to be managed locally because they do seem to be declining in population. Then the level 2 is the somewhat lower level of decline or threats to breeding in level 2. And level 3 is basically a very widespread species that use only limited or localized habitats for us. So much of this survey and this process is built around these classifications. Excuse me. So the next slide. So what is the birds of concern list used for? It's used to encourage landowners, land managers, land stewards to get to know their habitat and the needs of the birds that use that habitat. One good example is expanding native woodland understory plantings, plus, frankly, deer culling. I don't know if many of you know this, but actually deer have been observed. There are many, many examples of deer predating whitetail I'm talking about, obviously, but they will actually eat eggs out of ground or low-level nests. It's been observed many times. So deer culling can be an issue, although they're not the major predator. Small mammals like chipmunks, raccoons, possums are also predators. So one good example are 2 birds that nest on or near the ground, wood thrushes and ovenbirds. So the birds of concern list has identified these 2 species as being of concern. And so you want to manage natural areas as much as possible to enhance their opportunity to successfully nest. Go on to the next, please. So what are the numbers? In the region, this survey process has gone on for 21 years. That is equivalent to about 30,000 different surveys. And within that 30,000, about 200,000 plus individual observations of birds. That would be, if I was out in Rollins and I saw nesting, or I saw evidence of hooded mergansers, that would be an observation, as was pointed out. So, and all told, the number of birds throughout this time period exceeded 472,000 birds, and 190 plus different breeding species that breed in the Chicago area. And it's all done via point counts, and the total point counts is well over 2,000, and that's within almost 300 sites naturally spread across the region. And over the years, we've had more than 250 monitors, and the time of commitment and actually in the field is well over 18,000 hours. And remember that time frame. And of course, all of us have to travel. So, and some people travel fairly hectic, fairly long distances to get to their sites. So with travel time, a lot of time and effort has been invested in this. And the purpose was to measure population trends with these nesting species. Next slide. So obviously these numbers include data gathered by volunteered monitors in Lake County. And as best as I can tell, approximately 12 to 15% of the entire BCN database for Chicago Wilderness region came from Lake County. So to give you an idea of the importance of you folks and the monitoring that you can do if you're not already doing it. Next slide. So what I took a look and just got an idea of Lake County itself. Maybe you already knew this. You know, there's a lot of water in Lake County, but the land area is about 281,000 acres. As best I could tell from the Lake County Forest Reserve website, there are 38 sites totaling more than 24,000 acres within the state. If anybody has a question or a problem with that number, let me know. I'm just going by what the district said. And in addition to that 24,000 acres, there are also obviously a couple of state parks. There are, if you will, private preserves and certain city or suburban parks, if you will, that are managed as preserves rather than as playgrounds. So the Lake County area is a very significant area to do bird monitoring, just on the sheer scale of the habitat that you have within the county. Next, please. So I'll say, I know I said this too soon, but thanks to all of you, all of the dedicated monitors. Remember that number in the first slide. There's a lot of people involved in this program, and we're hoping to recruit more going forward. So, and I can answer some questions about how to do it. It's not terribly complicated. Go ahead. Just to give you an idea, I don't know how many people are familiar with or do the so-called North American Breeding Bird Survey. That's run by the, oh God, I can't remember the agency now, but they do across the entire lower 48, they do 3,200 24.5 mile long routes and across the lower 48 each year. And that protocol is pretty simple. You drive a road or a series of roads and you stop every half mile. So in effect, you're doing 50 points across that route. And that means that the BBS monitors account for about 160,000 points yearly. If we were to scale BBS up to the level of the coverage that we're doing within the Chicago Wilderness region in all the various counties that are involved, they would almost have to multiply the number of routes across the country by 10. Instead of doing 3,200 routes, they'd have to do 29,000 routes to get the same density of coverage. And recognize too that that is, in a sense, roadside birding. That's not going into an area, it's driving down a road and then listening and looking from a point that's roughly a half a mile from the previous point. So that gives you an idea, I think, of the density of coverage of the BCN breeding bird monitoring. Now, from there, next slide, please, we can get to something a little more concrete. People often ask, what type of habitats does BCN monitor? Well, this is a graphic covering 1999 through 2020, which is the same period where the data has been compiled and analyzed. The dark green line, if you will, is woodland or trees. The light green or chartreuse is grassland, and the orange one is cropland and to some extent shrubland. You can see from this, though, that the two primary habitat areas that are most get the most intensive cover over this time period have been woodlands #1, grasslands #2. So in a sense, the data for the those two types of habitat is probably the most, I hesitate to use this word, but I'll use it anyway, meaningful, because we have a lot of data. Go ahead to the next. Just for example, woodland birds, we have 100,000 plus individual observations. That's from a single point. And that amounts to about 50% of all of the BCN survey data. And there are 1,200 points scattered within 160 plus woodland sites across the 7 county region, including lake, obviously. And over the course of that time period, we've established that there are 66 woodland bird species that regularly breed within the Chicago Wilderness region. And from the statistical analysis, we developed reliable population trends data for 54 of those 66 species. 12 of the species are, the density is low enough, or the infrequency of breeding is the realistic statistical trends would have a margin of error larger than what the trend number told you. So that's why those trends are poorly at best and even unknown for how those species are doing. So let's from there talk a little bit about some of the specific birds here in the woodlands. Go on to the next, please. There's some good news. We got those 66 species. 22 of them, since the survey process began, the statistics tell us that for 22 of the species, there are moderate to strong population increases. And that can be attributed to a number of causes, one of which is simply the, shall we say, restoration and management of all of those natural areas. That's our forest preserves and our other natural land owners managing their property effectively. That produces a good thing. The birds prosper. There's another 17 species which they've remained pretty stable in population over that same time period. And then 15 species that show declines. And of course, those 12 species that we don't have enough data. On to the next. here's a couple of species that's kind of interesting because certainly when we began the survey, neither of these were very common at all in the Chicago region. Summer tanagers and pileated woodpeckers. And somebody just posted a question. None of the woodland data includes non-native, so no. That would be primarily that category we didn't do much with, urban birds. So you've got two species that are prospering here, that they've increased in numbers, and we can speculate that they're expanding their range. With pileateds, perhaps they're returning to traditional areas. With summer tanagers, they may be expanding their range northward. We could attribute it to climate change. We could attribute it to better, more friendly habitat within our natural areas. Go ahead to the next. Here's an interesting example of what I guess I'll call a range shift. I think hopefully you all know what the two calls that they make separate them out. The one on our left, on everybody's left, that says pizza, is actually grown in population across the Chicago wilderness, and the rate of growth is pretty substantial. That number means roughly that they are increasing, let's say they're doubling in about every 6 years. And conversely, the Chebec is declining. And the speculation, and it is that, but the speculation is that the bird on the left, which is the Acadian flycatcher, is moving north. It's maybe reoccupying territory or maybe not. It may be moving into territory it never occupied before. The bird on the right, which is a least flycatcher, we are at the southern end of their range, breeding range, and it may be, again, that climate change is causing them to nest further and further north and less around here. That is somewhat speculative, but it is at least a hypothesis to apply to what is happening. So here you have two very much look-alike birds, and one is going up and the other one's going down. And again, we can speculate on reasons, but the trend seems to be real. The error, and you can find all this, by the way, on the BCN website. You can see the error margin, which I'll show some more illustrations later. On to the next. Here's a really interesting example. This is not completely a woodland species. It's really more of a savanna species or an edge species, the redheaded woodpecker. I tell you, when I was a kid and grew up, my grandmother had a cottage up on the channel up in Channel Lake, and redheaded woodpeckers were everywhere. Everybody knew what a redheaded woodpecker was.
Why there was once on the farm.
I suspect other people remember that. In any case, when we first did the analysis 9 years ago, there was both observational evidence and statistical evidence that they were on a long-term decline here in Illinois. And certainly just sheerly from an observer's standpoint, that seemed to be true. But happily, maybe because of how do I put it? Because of the activities by the land managers, since 2013, that trend has reversed. And you see the plus minus. You can see that the 2013 trend was uncertain. The range of statistics exceeded the you might say the average decline. But in 2021, when we reanalyzed the larger data set it's now suggested at the very least they're stable, and they may have even begun growing again in population since 2013. So that's a piece of good news. And that, what I gave a similar talk to the Oak Ecosystem Recovery Council people, and the question was, why? And my somewhat smart aleck answer was, well, you're cutting down less dead trees. So in any case, there is at least some evidence here that whatever we're doing from a land management standpoint, perhaps putting more emphasis on oak savannas, also maybe doing less tree removal, dead tree removal. Redheaded woodpeckers at the very least have stabilized in population over the last few years, which is a good news. Go ahead to the next. And here's an example of a bird that isn't doing well. It's an ovenbird, and it's declined over this 21-year period. And that minus 4.6%, that's an annual percentage. But again, the margin of error, while fairly large, is lower than the annual drop. So we have good statistical evidence that it is declining. And one of the theories, I think, is shown in the next slide. Go to the next, if you would. Oh, okay. I'll come back to that one about let's talk a little bit about grassland species. There are 32 species that are regular breeders here in the Chicago region. 8 of them are showing, over that 21-year period, are showing moderate to strong increases. And there is speculation that a couple of those 8 species are extending their breeding range northward or dropping southward. The clay-colored sparrow was talked about earlier. That is much more common up in northern Wisconsin than it is here. So maybe it's reoccupying territory it once had here. Who knows? Climate change could be a effect, or it could be they could be just reoccupying their historical breeding range. There are 15 species that there's been little change in their density, 4 that show pretty statistically significant decline since 1999. And then there are 5 of the 32 that we just don't have enough data to really have a reliable statistical trend. And I think I talk in the next slide. Here's a couple of new ones. Beau mentioned dickcissels, but I find it fascinating, and I think we're all getting a chance to see it, is Sandhill Cranes are becoming more common nesters in, or they're not necessarily strictly marsh nesters. They will nest at the edge of grasslands. And they certainly will use grasslands for searching for food. And the dickcissels pretty clearly are increasing across our grassland habitat. And I think Beau mentioned that he was seeing more, or verified them at Rollins. That might be just one indicator of that phenomenon. On to the next. Perhaps the most interesting, and maybe in one sense most significant, this is the very important bird on the grassland block. Remember, 57% of the Henslow Sparrows population nationally uses our region's tall grass prairies and grasslands. And this is a quote from Jim Herkert. "No place in the world will you find a greater concentration of Henslows than in northeastern Illinois. It's a globally important landscape for this bird." And as you can see, there's been a steady since 1999. And the total number of records that that represents is well over 5,000. That's not 5,000 birds, that's just 5,000 records of a bird's presence. So Henslow Sparrows, they are a definite sign that we're doing something right in management, grassland management. And I won't get into the speculation about what they're doing right or what they're doing wrong. But this is a bird that is in trouble in the rest of its range. And for us, we are a reservoir for this species. So that is, I think, a really good piece of news. On to the next. Unfortunately, there are some grassland species that aren't doing as well, based on our own statistics. You've got grasshopper sparrow, you've got bobolink, you've got savanna sparrow, and although people might moan at why would we care about cowbirds, well, we do care about cowbirds. They're part of the ecosystem. These species, we know the statistics are reliable since 1999. These species have declined in our grasslands. So the question is why? And at the moment, we hope to encourage land managers to see if they can get some answers to those questions. Go ahead to the next, please. And just a small reminder, showing the great cowbird again. Some of the breeding species in the Chicago wilderness area are generalists. The poster child for me is redheaded woodpeckers. They seem to build nests everywhere. I've never had one nest in the backyard, but I've had them nest on the, I live on a, I've got a little tiny creek running through the back of my backyard, and right on the other side of the creek is a little wetland, and they nest right there, and they come to my backyard feeders all the time. But cowbirds also, you know, they're kind of generalists. They'll go where they can parasitize nests. Go ahead. What about shrubland species? There's a grand total of 37 that nest in this ephemeral habitat. And it's probably because it's ephemeral, it's the most difficult to characterize and the most difficult to manage. On a long-term time scale, shrubland either becomes grassland or woodland. The woods move in, or the grass moves in, maybe because of fire. It may be that the use of fire by the American Indians who populated this area may have been a factor. We don't really know that. But 7 of the 37 are doing pretty well. One of that is probably a range extension or reoccupying a range that it formerly occupied. And then there are 20 that have changed very little. And there are 4 that have decreased since '99 and 6 that are just not there in big enough numbers to have any sort of statistical conclusion. And by the way, you can find all of this on the BCN website. You can look at the exact numbers, the percentages, the range of error and so forth. So you can dissect it to your heart's content and certainly ask questions about it. But it's 21 years. It's a very, very large mass of data, as I indicated originally. So we think these trends are reliable, and we've had a number of ornithologists, you might say, who have no particular axe to grind in this thing, to take a look at the data and the statistical analysis. And the conclusion is these trends are pretty reliable. Go ahead. The one I talked about that seems to be new or maybe just returning is a mockingbird. There's a lot of argument about this one because it's traditionally been thought of as a southern species, but there aren't many records from let's say 3,000 years ago, whether they were here. But they seem to be increasing in the Chicago wilderness areas. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. By the way, somebody's posted a message about Merlin ID, and I can talk about that a little bit if you'd like. Mockingbirds are really fun to have around. And I guess if I had my druthers, a question, I'll just answer these questions as they come up. In the sense that we know when the managers are doing restoration work, we do know we can do before and after. But in the general sense, it's just strictly based on the annual results as part of the overall results. I won't get into the complicated statistics. The lady we hired has done other work of this type. And if she were here speaking for me, she would say these are very reliable trends within the error margin that's shown. Go ahead to the next. So again, here's our friend, the cowbird. I'm often tempted to say, does anybody care the cowbirds are declining? I think it isn't a particular problem, but longer range, we don't know how they fit into the ecology. So maybe it is a problem. We just don't know. But interestingly enough, goldfinches as breeding birds seem to be declining. Same's true with willow flycatcher. Same's true with American redstart. And the white-eyed vireo is a maybe. The error range is so wide that the plus may be not a plus. So it's pretty well established that goldfinches, willow flycatchers are not here in the same numbers as they were 20-odd years ago, breeding. I would argue the goldfinch, because I certainly get plenty at my feeders, but that's what the numbers are telling us. Go ahead to the next. Wetlands, we have some data, but it's not enough. Rollins, for example, we need region-wide data to really be able to for wetlands to critically determine whether or not hooded mergansers are doing well or not. So we need more monitoring in wetlands. And as was mentioned, monitoring wetlands can be done from the edge, but some large wetlands, you may not be able to hear everything unless you get into the marsh or wetland. And we just don't have enough data on the more common species to get reliable trends. More years of data, maybe more increased coverage, more monitors will close that gap. Go ahead. Some other questions that we hope to answer going forward, and that's why we need volunteers. I didn't highlight it there, but bobolinks are declining in our region. That may be reflective of what's going down where they migrate. You may have heard the stories that they're, if you will, poisoned on some of their wintering grounds. That may be a factor, or it could be something related to how continuous how the restoration work for grasslands has been done. But they do seem to be declining in our region. Conversely, there are some of the insect-eating insects that are doing better in our grasslands than nationally. We don't know why. Again, is that related to the overall decline of some insect populations? That's pretty well established scientifically. or is there some other factor? And I mentioned earlier ovenbirds. If you clear understory of invasives and you have difficulty reestablishing an understory of native plants because of, for example, deer browsing, which is a big problem. We definitely have an overpopulation of deer throughout the region. That ovenbirds, being ground nesters, are perhaps too accessible to predators. Chipmunks, everything from chipmunks to raccoons and possums will eat the ovenbird eggs or the young. And the other fascinating plus is over the years, we see more and more chimney swifts over the grasslands. And that's a fairly solid statistical conclusion. I should have put the number in there. But what we speculate, and again, it goes back to the broader question of insectivores, is it, there's more food over the grasslands? That kind of makes sense. But where are those chimney swifts nesting? You know, they traditionally, or let's say historically, nested in hollow trees. One of the projects we're talking about in BCN, particularly for the urban birding community, is let's start watching chimneys in cities and suburban areas. There may be a lot more colonies of chimney swifts nesting in chimneys than we think of. What brought that to mind was a post on iBet from a guy who was looking out his apartment window, a birder, and said chimney swifts were apparently nesting in that chimney right in the middle of the city. So that's an interesting question. I don't know that we know the answer, but we hope going forward to be able to ask questions like that and then recruit from within the birding community to get some answers. On to the next one. So that's my talk. I didn't measure the time. If I went too fast, I apologize. If I went too slow, I don't apologize. Thank you, and I'll certainly take questions.
Okay, if your question is not, you might want to put them in the chat mode.
I see a lot of questions. Okay, the first question, understory trees. Let's start with that one. That is really important. Probably more for wood thrushes than for ovenbirds, which are literally ground nesters. Probably a greater concentration of forbs in woodlands would perhaps give greater security to ovenbirds nesting on the ground. But understory trees are very important for a lot of low nesting birds. Birds that don't nest up, well up, like my favorite blue-gray gnatcatcher, which is usually 20 feet up, and you can barely see the nest. It's so small. The question of whether or not cowbirds could be declining because their host birds are declining, that's probably true in the sense that some of their hosts are declining, but it's not really clear if they have a choice. Do they say, I'm going to put my eggs in this particular bird's nest, meadowlark, for example. Meadowlarks aren't doing that badly. They're stable, but maybe some of the smaller sparrows that I mentioned, grasshopper, maybe fewer grasshopper sparrows means fewer opportunities for cowbirds to dump their eggs in grasshopper sparrows' nests. That's certainly a possibility. Vesper sparrow, I think I don't remember the stats, but there are stats on the website about that. I don't remember if that species is regular enough here that we could draw a solid statistical conclusion. The answer to the question about wetland birds, that's a good one, morning or evening. actually, a lot of birds, if you use sound or song, for many of the wetland birds, you have a better shot at it in the evening or very early morning. Sometimes they shut up pretty quickly after dawn, but they're more reliably vocalizing after sunset. And I think the protocol most of the time is morning, but that's something we might take a look at as an encouraging thing that we might be able to do, get more data on wetland birds. And the Zion Methodist Church, somebody should watch that and see how many chimney. It's a lot of observers, a lot of people that have done this count have continuously said they're seeing more and more chimney swifts early morning flying around and over the grassland points that they're doing. That's a real increase in the number. And we're not talking about during migration, we're talking about during the breeding season. But what we don't know is where they're coming from. So there may be a lot more chimneys occupied than we realize. And I don't know, I can't answer, Douglas, your question. I don't know how many artificial chimney-like structures there are in our region. I do know where they've been put up. They are occupied and used. And the big advantage is they can be cleaned. You can do a pretty good job of keeping predators out and so forth. So I think they're certainly a useful tool. I'll mention in passing, I talked about insectivores, barn swallows and tree swallows. Tree swallows are probably higher in numbers because we put up so many bluebird houses. Because as you all know, tree swallows love to take over bluebird houses. And they compete with redheaded woodpeckers for cavities in dead trees or dead branches. But they got that third competition too, and that's starlings. So you've got a tension zone there in dead trees. So far as I know, starlings have not decided to nest in nest boxes. Tree swallows are certainly perfectly willing to drive away bluebirds and take over their boxes. But the other interesting one is barn swallows. You know, there are darn few barns left in the Chicago area. There are some, but there is one thing that a lot of the forest preserve districts have done. They put up pavilion type structures, and those are open to the air, and they generally have, particularly at the edges, they have beams, horizontal beams running across to support the center of the roof and the eaves, you might say. And I don't know about you guys, but I've walked into a lot of fairly newly built pavilions and found lots of barn swallows. And for that matter, cliff swallows will have been determined to use that as well. So it may be they're opportunistic and they're taking advantage of a new source of nesting habitat. It's, to me, a kind of an interesting phenomenon. Yeah, somebody posted that the protocol for Audubon Great Lakes is ideal is to start 30 minutes before sunrise. I guess I would say in June, you probably could even start earlier than that. I've heard Virginia rails calling when it's totally dark out. And that's why my wife and I, we used to do a lot of monitoring up in northern Wisconsin, and we were much more successful monitoring at night for the marsh birds. They were much more vocal at night. Yeah, Bonner Farm Forestry, I don't know it. And I'm not sure what that means. I think somebody hit their keyboard that last question. So that, I think, have I answered all your questions? Oh, just a quick comment. I'm two things. No, we don't monitor non-natives. We originally planned to do an urban monitoring program, which would have looked at things like house sparrows and so forth, but by and large, we don't. I would urge you to be cautious using the Merlin Sound ID. My own experience with birding by ear is get to learn the song, and the best way to ultimately to learn the song is to hear a song you don't know and do your very best to find it and see it. And I will also caution you that some birds learn other birds' songs. So birding by ear has a certain built-in statistical error. It's a pretty small.
Lake County.
Yeah, Bob, one thing that's kind of interesting to observe, some people on here besides myself are stewards in the forest preserve, and I've left a lot of ash up that have died, obviously, but in trying to encourage pileated and the redheaded. So we're kind of watching to see if more come to old school, let's say, where I am, and move their way up from Daniel Wright.
Yeah, I think, I think that it's a, how do you put it? It's a reality. If we just specifically talk about redheaded woodpeckers, they're aerial insectivores also. They feed, they're pretty good at catching insects in the air. And probably the main reason that they declined so much might have been originally competition with starlings. I've personally watched starlings take over redheaded woodpecker nests, keep the adults out, they get inside, and they keep the redhead out. So that may have been the biggest thing, but also tree removal, dead tree removal. There's one other area that is we don't replace. It's very difficult. There are many wet areas throughout the region that originally had a lot of dead trees sitting in the water. They died and were dead. And a lot of those places, all of those dead trees have fallen over with time. They rotted out and fell over. And since we so much control you might say our water movement today, it's not, we may have lost a lot of nesting habitat for that species. As Charlotte says here, BCN and the original forest preserve districts very much welcome new monitors. I think the main key is to get comfortable birding by ear. The Merlin app can mislead you, so the best thing you can do is learn the songs of the birds that are in the habitat you're monitoring. And if you hear something you don't know, try and get a look at it. So maybe you can identify it and figure it out. Just like that clay-colored sparrow. That's a really interesting. They do nest in DuPage County, for example. They're more of a shrubland bird than a grassland bird. But they may be coming back. That's all I really got to say. I'll happily ask any more questions, but I'm pretty well done.
Okay, are there any questions that would like to be asked, or if not, we thank you again very much. And as Shar said, you can also get a hold of Shar, and you're interested in monitoring. And we're always looking for monitors down at Waukegan Beach also to continue. Many people do, but to continue, and we hope that it's a good way to get out and walk and have fun and get your observation skills tuned up. So
Okay, we're done. It's just
Okay.
rambling.
Sandy, you're live, by the way. So we'll see you next month.
I have two questions I wanted to ask. And I don't know, you can use the thumbs up or show of hands. How many people here participate in the spring bird count? Or maybe putting the question in the other way, does anybody not participate in the spring bird count? Don't be ashamed, just tell us.
No.
Okay, Kerry, you haven't, we'll do it this year. But we're talking to the Illinois Natural History Survey, and we're contemplating the idea of doing a summer solstice count somewhere around late June, 21st, I think is the summer solstice. And the idea would be that that would be a countywide program that people would go out and spend one day seeing what they could see or hear during the height of breeding season. It might be a useful snapshot of a much larger number of people, because a couple thousand people participate in the spring bird count. So keep that in mind. You may hear more about that going forward.
All right. Well, thank you. And everybody have a good week and a good evening.